Yesterday, Nintendo launched a brand new expansion pack for the Nintendo Switch Online service, which introduced 9 Nintendo 64 games and 14 Genesis games to their retro lineup. To celebrate, we started looking at the 16-bit titles hitting the service, which included everything from Golden Axe to Gunstar Heroes. Today we're going to dive into the second half of the Genesis lineup, which is where almost all of the heavy hitters are located. I'm talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, Phantasy Star, Streets of Rage, Strider, and even Shinobi. Join me as I flip through the pages of classic magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly, Die Hard Game Fan, Machines Sega, GamePro, and more to see what old school critics thought when these games first came out. This is the Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. From the moment the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack was announced, you saw a chorus of people complaining that it was overpriced. If you want to talk about expensive, then look no further than the first game that we're going to be talking about today, Phantasy Star 4. When this 3MB game was first released in 1995, it retailed for an astonishing $100. To put that in perspective, that would be about $180 in 2021 if you adjust for inflation. Now, you would think that the high price tag might have dominated the discussion, but GamePro barely mentions it. Instead, they focused on the static intro and scrolling text. Phantasy Star 4 is the latest installment of the mother of all Genesis RPGs, yet it never gives you the sense that you're about to embark on something special. They ultimately gave it a 4 out of 5 and called it amazingly rich in detail and the kind of game you'll lose sleep over. Next Generation disagreed and compared it to what Square was doing at the time. Since the Phantasy Star 1 and 2 heyday, the Secret of Mana and the Final Fantasy games have pushed the genre to new limits of innovation and incredible graphic detail. Phantasy Star 4, while still a good game, is years behind. With nothing that goes above or beyond the previous titles, the future of this series isn't very bright. Leave it to Die Hard Game Fan to go in the complete opposite direction, with Nick Rock surprising nobody with his inflated score of 97%. The ultimate Sega RPG has finally arrived. Although it was mistranslated and has little connection with the previous games because of this, the game itself is the same and undeniably one of the greatest RPGs ever fashioned. Nick's colleague, Kay Lee, agreed, arguing that this game is the Genesis's Final Fantasy III. I don't disagree, but I am curious why Game Fan chose not to score the gameplay. Do JRPGs not have gameplay? Weird. Even though Phantasy Star 4 has its fair share of problems, I'm just happy to see an epic role-playing game included in the expansion pack. Six years into the system's life and a mere months before the Saturn's debut, Sega decided to once again wade into the cutesy mascot character waters with a delightful platformer named Ristar. With gorgeous graphics and a likable hero, you have to believe that Sega expected big things from this cartoony star. Unfortunately, it was completely overshadowed by the impending 32-bit war and the recent release of Sonic & Knuckles. Which means that there's a good chance that many gamers will play this for the first time on their Switch. Look, I consider this to be good news, and based on the reviews, so did Die Hard Game Fan. Predictably, they couldn't contain their excitement, with Nick Rocks giving it a 98% and calling it one of the greatest Genesis games ever programmed. Every aspect was handled perfectly, from the remarkable graphics to the excellently composed background music to the perfect control. Skid also liked the game, but even back then could tell that it was being overshadowed. This game should be getting much more hype. Next Generation also loved Ristar. I mean, they still gave it a 3 out of 5 simply because it was on an older console, but they straight up call it much more than just another cutesy mascot on another cutesy platform game. Ristar is one of the best platform games to date. They noted that it borrows heavily from Treasure's Dynamite Heady, but it still contains enough original gameplay, solid action, and fun to escape the copycat label and be one of 1995's most promising games. You saw a similar score with Game Players, who gave it a 79%, as well as an 84% from Machines Sega. GamePro raved that beautiful graphics and fun gameplay helped make this an auspicious debut for Sega's newest hop and bop star. Despite solid scores and gorgeous graphics, Ristar was a one-and-done hero. That's a shame, because I would have loved to have seen what they could have done with a 32-bit sequel on the Saturn. Now, one thing that I like about the selection of Genesis games we're getting is that not only is there a nice variety of genres, but we also get multiple versions of those genres done in different ways. We get the popular Sonic 2, as well as the lesser-known Ristar. We get the fantasy brawling with Golden Axe, as well as the bare-knuckles back-alley fighting with Streets of Rage 2. We get the hardcore seriousness of Contra, as well as the more lighthearted and cartoony run-and-gun shooting of Gunstar Heroes. The same is true when it comes to our role-playing game choices. We get the traditional, turn-based Japanese role-playing game with Phantasy Star 4, as well as the more strategy-driven Shining Force. I'm here to tell you to not sleep on Shining Force, especially if you're a fan of Nintendo's Fire Emblem series. This is a fun, tactical RPG that holds up better than you might expect. GamePro also name-checked Phantasy Star in their review, but not the fourth installment. Shining Force won't dethrone the current king of Genesis RPGs, Phantasy Star 2, but it's packed with enough quests and characters to satisfy your role-playing appetite. Machines Sega was one of the game's biggest cheerleaders, calling it a beautifully crafted piece of Mega Drive software with just the right balance of action and adventure to satisfy all needs. There's just something about Shining Force that makes it a classic game, and there's no competition for it on the Mega Drive's RPG range. Megaplay wasn't ready to go that high, but Martin Alessi still enjoyed the adventure. Shining Force is one of the better RPGs on the Genesis lately. The music is a disappointment, and the tracks are extremely repetitive, especially during the overdrawn battle scenes. That said, the long quest and sharp graphics earned Shining Force a 73%. That's not exactly a huge endorsement, but I say give the game a look. If you're a fan of tactical RPGs, I think you're gonna dig it. If you ask me, Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master is easily one of the 5 best Genesis games ever made. Now, maybe even top 3. But look, you didn't come here for my rankings, you want to know what the critics said. And boy, let me tell you, there are a lot of reviews for Shinobi 3. Let's go ahead and start with Die Hard Game Fan, who, let's face it, you already know is going to back up my love for this amazing ninja game. The Inquirer gave the game a 94% and raved that everything in this game screams more! More color, more action, more graphic effects, more gameplay elements, and, of course, more music. A must for all Genesis owners. Skid used his review to note the advancements that had come to 16-bit game development. The third in the series is by far the best, accurately representing just how far the Genesis has come in just 3 years. Believe it or not, GamePro actually liked Shinobi 3 more than Die Hard Game Fan. Just when you were getting bored with similar looking and playing action games, along comes Joe Musashi to shake things up. Mind-blowing backgrounds, great new moves, a horse riding sequence, and hot music push the Genesis to the max. 3 cheers for Shinobi 3. Electronic Gaming Monthly also loved the game, with all 4 editors giving it a 9 out of 10 score. The third Shinobi game is by far the best in the series. The gameplay is fantastic with its new moves and killer magic, all requiring some technique. This game is loaded with huge bosses, some with cool warping effects that make it look even more real. Now, across the pond, the British critics held back a little bit more than their American counterparts. Machines Sega, for example, gave it an 89%, while computer and video games went lower with an 82%. However, the lowest score comes from Sega Force Mega, where Mark gave it a 79% and complained that unless you're a real big fan of the earlier games and you already own one of them, then you may find that this is possibly too reminiscent of those adventures. Too reminiscent of previous Shinobi games? I wonder if he means Shadow Dancer, or does he mean The Revenge of Shinobi? I mean, he can't possibly mean the Cyber Shinobi. Yeah, I think this game is way better than Mark says. To the max! Ladies and gentlemen, with only 3 games left, we're finally at the peak of the pack. You aren't going to find any bad reviews going forward, especially when it comes to our next game, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Look, I think it's safe to say that this was one of the most anticipated sequels of the 16-bit era. Well, let me tell you, Sega did not disappoint. Critics were quick to heap praise on the platforming masterpiece, with many considering it to be the best game in the Sonic franchise. One of those magazines was GamePro, who gave it a perfect 5 out of 5 and called it fabulous gaming that is actually better than the original. There's enough stuff that's new and different in Sonic 2 to make it a must-have cart for fans of the original. Probably the best thing about Sonic 2 is that it's just plain fun. Beginning and hardcore gamers alike will enjoy this fast-paced romp with his hedgehogness and Tails. I never want to say his hedgehogness again. The UK megs were especially susceptible to Sonic 2's charm, as you saw almost identical scores from all the top critics. For example, Mega gave it a 94%, while Sega Force went all the way up to 97% for this one. Mean Machines Sega settled on 96%, concluding that Sonic the Hedgehog has outdone himself, an absolute gem of a game which your Mega Drive will be screaming out for. Brilliant! If you miss Sonic 2, you should be committed to a loony bin. What actually surprised me is that Electronic Gaming Monthly was the most critical of the sequel, with Sonic 2 earning an average score of 8.75 out of 10. While Ed gave it a perfect 10 out of 10 and called Sonic 2 the best all-round game on the market, though Steve and Martin gave it 8s. Martin griped that it's not linear, but still too straightforward. And Steve noted that the play was a little disjointed. But even with EGM's slightly lower takes, Sonic 2 remains one of the best reviewed Genesis games of all time. If you're looking for a great beat-em-up on the Genesis, then you're not going to find one that's better than Streets of Rage 2. Look, that's not a controversial opinion. While I'm sure there are people who prefer the fantasy world of Golden Axe, or maybe playing as Frank Castle in The Punisher, few people are making the case that those games are actually better than Streets of Rage 2. Nor should they, because this is one of the best Genesis games ever made. Jazz over at Mean Machines Sega loved that the game showed off what the 16-bit hardware was capable of. Streets of Rage 2 is the ultimate cartridge beat-em-up on the Mega Drive. The graphics are superb, with huge sprites and great animation. There's also loads of enemies attacking at once. Sound and presentation are of an equally high standard. And the gameplay is just superb, especially in 2-player team mode. You couldn't want more from a beat-em-up. GamePro also loved the game, giving it a perfect 5 out of 5 and comparing it to the other brawlers on the market. Stacked against the Final Fights and Super Double Dragons of the world, Streets of Rage 2 more than fends for itself. 16 megabits of great improved graphics, massive sprites, top-notch audio, and multitudes of moves make it the 165-bit side-scrolling Street Fighter to beat. I love how nobody caught the 165-bit thing before the issue went to print. It's golden. Now, while Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't review Streets of Rage 2, their Sega-themed spin-off magazine, Mega Play, certainly did. They were surprisingly low on the game, especially when compared to their colleagues. Howard called it a solid action fighter with a good variety of moves and weapons. However, I found the special moves gave you too much strength and made the game too easy. Martin gave it a slightly higher score, but still complained that the action is too repetitive. Yeah, that's certainly a criticism that could be levied against pretty much every beat-em-up of that era, including Final Fight. Speaking of which, if you want to see even more brawler reviews, then you should watch me compare the reviews of the Streets of Rage series to those of the Final Fight series and see who wins. It's a few years old, but it's definitely worth your time. Before Sonic the Hedgehog, before Streets of Rage, and yes, before Gunstar Heroes, the Genesis killer app was Strider. A port of the popular arcade game from Capcom, this was one of the 16-bit system's first major hits, both critically and commercially. It was the must-own game of 1990, and not just because it was the first Genesis game to use 8 megabits of memory, something that translates to a whopping 1 megabyte. Yeah, okay, that may not sound all that impressive 30 years later, but I assure you that Strider was a big deal. Computer and video games grumbled about the high price point, but argued that it's well worth the expense. We've consulted experts on the matter, and the word is that the Mega Drive Strider is Arcade Strider. The graphics and sound are exactly the same as the arcade, as is the brilliant playability. We're talking about an utterly fantastic platform game here. Definitely the greatest yet seen on Sega's 16-bit Wonder Machine. You're pretty much getting 3,000 quids worth of arcade machine for 41 notes, so you can't really complain, can ya? While CVG's score was higher than most, you definitely saw similar takes from the usual suspects. Sega Pro gave it a 92%, while Megatech was one tick lower with 91%. Mean Machines Sega gave it a 90% and called it a lavish beat-em-up and an absolutely cracking conversion that's identical to the coin-op in almost every way. There's one complaint: there just aren't enough levels. The one failing it has is the comparative lack of levels. 5 just isn't enough. Now, back in the States, Electronic Gaming Monthly liked it so much that all 4 of their editors gave it 9s, leading the magazine to name it the best game of 1990. It also picked up the prize for Best Graphics and helped lead the Genesis to winning the Best Video Game System prize. Now, in case you're wondering, the lowest score I could find was GamePro's 4 out of 5. This ran back in their December 1990 issue, which was only 3 months after they first started scoring their reviews. You have to understand that this was a time when they were more interested in punny phrasing than hard-hitting critiques. Which may explain why they ended their review with, "What more is there to say? You'll take this one in stride." Yeah, that's not great, but Strider is, and that's why it should be one of the first games that you play when you subscribe to Nintendo's new expansion pack. And those are the Genesis games coming to the Switch this week. Thank you so much for not only taking the time to watch this video, but also the first half of the Genesis lineup, and also maybe even the Nintendo 64 releases. I mean, that N64 video that I posted really blew up, which, I'm not gonna lie, kinda caught me off guard. If you're somebody who enjoys talking about old school games and analyzing classic reviews, then let me recommend our Electronic Gaming Monthly Best and Worst series. We went year by year from 1989 all the way up to 2009, and counted down both EGM's best reviewed and worst reviewed games for each year. And let me tell you, the results will surprise you. We're also going to be starting shows about super play and video games and computer entertainment in the coming weeks. So stick with Defunct Games if you love that kind of thing. Thank you again for watching and also commenting. These videos take a long time to put together, and I really appreciate your support. Hey, thanks for watching me analyze these classic reviews. After 3 straight days of putting these features together, I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda spent. I'm honestly really excited to get back to the old grind of just writing reviews and doing game over episodes. But before we get into that, here's the question of the day. What systems do you want to see added to the expansion pack? I mean, I love that we're getting both the Genesis and the Nintendo 64 games, but come on, where are my TurboGrafx 16 favorites? Or Sega CD? Or so many of those systems that used to be on the Virtual Console? I wish Nintendo would just get their act together and create a real Netflix-style retro subscription service. Not this damn half-step. Anyway, let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a review of Black Widow Recharged. followed by not one, but 2 horror-themed Game Over episodes. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,